All right, thanks a lot for that introduction, Patrick. And seems like we got all the Zoom stuff figured out. So welcome everyone. Let's have a look at Zabbix. Let's have a look at the product, the features, what we can do with it. But first things first, my name is Nathan Liefting. I work, as was mentioned, for Opensource ICT Solutions. I'm a Zabbix consultant and trainer there. And basically what I do 40 hours a week is build Zabbix stuff. Now, today, I would like to talk to you about what Zabbix is, what the product is, what we can use it for, and basically just a high-level overview of the product itself. And when we are talking about monitoring, of course, we're going to start at the beginning. Why would we even want to monitor? So first things first, when we are monitoring, we want to use it to prevent probably some downtime. Make sure that our IT environments, the IT infrastructure that we have, whether that's the cloud, whether that's on-prem, is transparent and easy to manage. So monitoring is oftentimes overlooked, but it's also very important to make sure that we can do those things. Now, doing that with Zabbix, we're going to start by making sure that we collect our data, visualize that later on as well, so we can have dashboards and all of that stuff. Analyze it, do trend predictions, but also make sure that when an issue arises, we get notified about that. So it's all about transparency. And not just that, but reducing your downtime costs will effectively make sure that your environments will be running more, and it will make sure that you have less costs when something goes down. So when we do not utilize a monitoring system, that can cost us money. And utilizing a monitoring system like Zabbix can make sure that we keep downtime to a minimum. When we're talking about airlines, delays can cost us a lot of money. For every minute of downtime, for example, you could lose $65. In our data center, if we have a big outage unplanned, it might cost us a lot of downtime. And when we have a lot of downtime in a data center, of course, a lot of stuff at the same time goes down. And even for things like the auto industry. So keeping that downtime to a minimum is important. And we're going to use our Zabbix monitoring system to do just that. Now, you might not know Zabbix yet. You might have been working with it for a while because Zabbix has been around for a lot of time. So many years. Which means that we have a lot of experience with the product. And the cool thing about Zabbix is it's 100% open source. You will never have to pay anything to use the product. It's free, you can download it. Not only that, we can find the source code right on git.zabbix.com and do our own audits on it, make changes to it for us internally. But the only thing to keep in mind is that Zabbix is closed development. So it's developed by Zabbix SIA in Riga. They do the sole development of the product and they push it forward and add the new features to it. So 100% open source, 100% free, no need to pay for any licenses, but it is in closed development. Now that we know of, there's more than 300,000 installations worldwide. It's always a little bit hard to track with open source software because, of course, you're not going to know of every single installation. But there is a lot of users using the Zabbix product, which is very useful because the more users we have, the more additions are done, the more templates are built by the community, which is always great to see. The user interface is provided in 15 languages, which means that we also have a user interface that's readily available to use in environments where we have just want to do some localization, or if we have a mixed environment of people from all around the globe, an international environment, we can use different languages for different users. And another thing that's pretty awesome about Zabbix as a product is that even though it is 100% open source, we can actually get technical support on it. So there's different levels of technical support, like 24/7 or 8x5 technical support, which we can utilize to make sure that even though we don't have to pay for the product, we can if we do need to have those SLAs in place. Zabbix integrates with a lot of solutions. For example, we can utilize it to monitor various systems, but it also integrates with other solutions that we might have already set up in our infrastructure. We can visualize with dashboards, which are extended upon quite often. And another thing about Zabbix is it is very scalable. So we can monitor thousands, hundreds of thousands of devices, or better yet, millions of metrics without running into issues with scalability there, because we run Zabbix on our own hardware or in the cloud on the hardware of our cloud provider. And then we can just scale up as far as our hardware will allow us to. Another thing, security is very important to Zabbix, so we can encrypt all of the various connections between the various Zabbix components to make sure that we have that additional layer of security in our Zabbix environment. And the basic architecture looks a little bit like this. Like I said, we need to run Zabbix somewhere. We can do that on our own hardware or somebody else's hardware, basically, like the cloud, or maybe in some containers. But we always need to have the basic architecture in place. And the first three things we need to set up our Zabbix environment is the Zabbix database running MySQL or Postgres or Oracle DB, the Zabbix backend application, so the Zabbix server itself, as well as a front end running on a web server that supports PHP, for example, Nginx or Apache. And those three components make up our Zabbix environment. When we have that in place, when we have that installed, we can then start to use it to collect our metrics. And metric collection can be done from various different locations. For example, another component that you might find in Zabbix environments is the Zabbix agent. And the agent can be used to install it to various servers, Windows and Linux, for example, or Unix-based systems, and collect values from those systems. And we can do that directly from the Zabbix server application, or we could do that through a proxy as well. And although the proxy isn't necessarily part of that basic architecture, it is used in a lot of environments to provide scalability as well as monitoring distributed locations. So we can put that proxy anywhere we would like, as long as we have a network connection between the server, the backend, and the proxy. We can use that to monitor behind firewalls, as well as offload the data collection from the Zabbix server towards that proxy. And this is an environment that you might, or a setup that you might see in a lot of environments. We have that Zabbix setup, and we utilize those proxies to make sure that we can monitor the distributed locations. Of course, we don't always have a device where we can install an agent. Think of a switch or think of a specific application, and maybe it's a web application. Not everything can be monitored by installing an agent. We also have various types of agentless monitoring. So we can use SNMP, IPMI, or even custom implementations to get that data collected. And once we have that data collected, we want to make sure that we can also receive a notification from it. So of course, our Zabbix server can also send out notifications. We can use it to send emails, integrate with Telegram, Signal, ticketing systems. We can do visualization in our Zabbix environments directly to make sure that those collected metrics can be put into nice graphs, for example. And of course, we can use the Zabbix API to integrate with various different resources or automate further upon our Zabbix installation. Now, like we said, we have those three different components: the front end, the database, and the Zabbix server. The server is all about data collection, as well as calculating the triggers, creating the events, and sending out the notifications. We have the front end, which is all about configuration management and the visualization, for example, through those graphs. And the database is all for the data storage. Now, real quick, the way this works is when we make a change in the front end, it will be stored into the database. The Zabbix server can then get that information from the database and utilize that information to start collecting the metrics, as well as do the various other configured things that we set up in the front end. So basically all of that communication is happening through that database and is very important. Now these 3 different parts can be set up on a single instance. We can also split them up, set up different Linux instances and install the front end to a different one than the database and the server. And utilizing the built-in Zabbix server high availability, we can also make a high availability setup out of this, and we can utilize built-in or industry practices to do the same thing on the front end and the database. So a more advanced architecture might look something like this, where we have 2 Zabbix servers, of which one is in active mode and the other one is in passive mode, waiting until there's an issue with the other node and then taking over. So high availability is a big part of our Zabbix environment in 6.0. It will keep Zabbix running even when we have issues with a single node. And we do this all through that database. So when we set up various Zabbix servers to communicate with the same database, they can also become part of a high availability cluster, and the database will keep in mind which of the nodes is active. And if one of the nodes is no longer connecting to the database, it will also know to do a failover. So the database will be the single source of truth. Now, this is a built-in functionality just for the Zabbix server application, of course. For the front end and database, we'll have to use different tools, but we can set that up quite easily, which makes this very easy to set up, to extend further and create a high available Zabbix setup. And importantly as well, the proxies and the agents also work with a high available Zabbix setup. So a proxy can communicate with different nodes, and it will know which one of those nodes is active, and it will only send the data to the active node at that moment, as well as the agents can do the same thing. Right, and we have our Zabbix set up now. What is the first thing we are going to do? Well, collecting data is where we get started. And Zabbix can collect various types of data. So of course, when we have our own IT infrastructure, there is a lot of various different components that make up our entire IT infrastructure. Maybe we have physical switches and routers that we want to monitor, as well as servers running Linux and Windows. All of that stuff should be monitored to make sure that we have a high-level overview of all of those different systems. So we can do that with Zabbix, of course. We can utilize SNMP, for example, to get data from the switches and the routers. We can install the Zabbix agent to get information of those servers, but it goes beyond that as well. For example, we have built-in VMware monitoring to make sure that we can discover virtual machines and hypervisors, as well as the data stores, and keep the health of our virtualization in mind. We have full built-in cloud monitoring for Azure and AWS, for example. Docker, Kubernetes monitoring is built in these days as well. So we really can get a high-level overview of all of those various parts of our IT infrastructure, whether that's hosted by ourselves in our own data center, or whether that's done somewhere by somebody else for us. So long as we can get the data from somewhere, the idea is that with Zabbix, we can get that data and make sure that we use and utilize that data for monitoring. Another feature that might be interesting is Java application monitoring. If you have some Java applications running like JBoss, Tomcat, Oracle, then you can also utilize Zabbix to monitor those directly. Although we do not have full APM, application performance monitoring just yet, which is on the roadmap. We do have Java application monitoring, so we can get in-depth information about those. Now, the Zabbix agent, like we said, is one of the ways to collect data, which is by far the easiest method to work with when we start to monitor our Windows or Linux environments. And oftentimes when I mention an agent of any kind, the Zabbix agent as well, customers they get a little bit hesitant, especially the sysadmins who are like, okay, I have to install yet another agent on my server, which will hog the CPU and the memory. And I just don't want to install all of those agents. Now, of course, Zabbix keeps that in mind as well, because monitoring isn't your core task of your server. Let's say you're running a Linux server with a web server. You don't want that agent to take all the resources away from what that server should be doing, which is hosting your websites. So Zabbix made sure to keep that Zabbix agent as efficient as possible. It has a negligible performance overhead, and on Linux, I think it uses less than a megabyte of RAM by default. Of course, the more checks we do on the agent, the more load will be added, but we really don't have to worry too much about adding too much load on that agent, because almost all of the default Linux checks, as well as your necessary application monitoring, can be done without adding significant loads to that agent at all. And we can also get data from the agent or request it from the agent. So we can decide on the mode of communication here. The Zabbix agent can be configured to push data towards us, so in an active mode towards the Zabbix server or proxy, or we can set up the Zabbix server or proxy to communicate with the agent and get information from it, which can be very useful if we are trying to monitor through a firewall, but the firewall only allows incoming or outgoing connections, as well as it can be very useful for security. A major security issue with a lot of monitoring environments that security would like to mitigate is the fact that when you set up your monitoring system, it has access to all of these different subnets through all of these different ports. And then when you do have a compromised Zabbix environment, which can happen to any application, of course, then you might have a compromised system that has access through firewalls to all of those different systems. When we let the agent communicate outwards towards the Zabbix server or proxy, that mitigates some of that risk. So we have the choice there to make things even a little bit more secure that way. Now, the agent can be installed on various platforms, Linux, Windows, Unix-based systems like macOS as well as OpenBSD, NetBSD, FreeBSD, Oracle Solaris, HP UX, and AIX. So we have quite a lot of platforms available. It's also easy to extend. So if there's a check that doesn't necessarily come included with the agent, Zabbix always likes to give you the tools available to make sure that you can actually extend upon those features and functionalities. It's backwards compatible. So if you're still running Zabbix Agent 2 and you have a new Zabbix 6 environment, no problem. You can still run that older agent. Of course, it's not supported anymore and you'll miss out on the new functionalities. But just in case you're upgrading, you don't have to upgrade all of those agents instantly as well. On Windows, we get quite a lot of features specifically designed for Windows as well, like WMI and performance counter monitoring, as well as event log monitoring. And of course, the agent also focuses on security, so we can make sure to set up the connection fully encrypted with a strong TLS or a shared key to make use of those certificates or pre-shared keys. Now, like we said, not everything can be done through an agent, so we do get SNMP monitoring as well, version 1 or 2, unencrypted plain text over the network, or version 3 to make sure that SNMP is encrypted as well. Polling and trapping is both supported here. We can utilize IPMI to monitor things like iDRAC and ILO interfaces or any BMC that supports IPMI. Of course, you have your default ICMP ping checks to make sure that you have a device that's reachable, as well as that the latency isn't too high, and your TCP checks to make sure that your ports are open. Database monitoring can be done through the agent directly for MySQL, Oracle, and Postgres. But we also have ODBC available to monitor Microsoft SQL databases or anything that supports the ODBC protocol. Website performance and functionality monitoring can be done as well, which is different from the HTTP data collection, which we can utilize to monitor APIs, for example. We have SSH and telnet checks to make sure that devices that might not support an agent, or maybe they don't even have SNMP, you can only log in through SSH or telnet. We can utilize that as well. Just execute a command after logging in. And if you are utilizing Prometheus somewhere, or you have an application that's providing information through Prometheus monitoring, we have some built-in functionality for that as well. And if you run into some limits, Zabbix always tries to give you the tools to utilize your own scripts or plugins, for example, a little Python script that you've built, and push that data towards your Zabbix environment. And then, of course, we're naming a lot of stuff, a lot of different means of collecting our data. Do I have to build all of that myself? Well, if you've seen an older version of Zabbix, you might think, well, there's no templates available for all of that. Well, a lot of that has changed because Zabbix has a complete integrations team available. So they are building templates daily. You might find new templates available already. So just check out zabbix.com/integrations. You will find most of the templates readily available there, or just do a clean Zabbix install and you'll find all of the templates included. And you can see there's quite a long list of available integrations already. And because Zabbix is an open source product, there's also a very active community available. And the community is always trying to help each other through things like Telegram, but also by sharing their own templates. So you can check out github.com/Zabbix/community templates, and you will find all of the templates built by the community there if they shared them, or you might use Google to find some of them that might not be listed in that GitHub just yet. So there's a lot of different ways to get this going. And if there isn't an implementation done yet, you cannot find it in the community either, then of course you can just start building it yourself. So we set up the data collection. What's next? Well, in Zabbix, we have two separate configurations for the collecting of the data, as well as the detection of the problems. So detecting problems can be done as well. Of course, we can do real-time detection of those issues by defining our own thresholds, setting up our own trigger expressions, which are quite easy to understand and set up. Once you get into them, it's a little bit of a learning curve, but utilizing the various videos and blog posts available, as well as the documentation, it is quite easy to start defining your own thresholds and making sure that you can start to define the problems and detect them how you want them to be detected. It's not just as simple as setting up an item and defining a threshold to it. No, we have a very complex way to make sure that we can get to the exact desired result. And of course, we can make sure to apply that in our templates, or even override the default settings that we might have on the templates already. We can utilize macros for that. And we can start to detect anomalies, do trend prediction. We can even set up flexible thresholds using baseline monitoring. And of course, anything that we would like through any of the many customization options. You can set up your own expressions. You can define them just how you want to detect exactly what you need to detect. Detecting the problem isn't everything. Of course, we have to see it somewhere as well. For that, we can utilize the Zabbix frontend either through monitoring problems or through setting up our own dashboards. So we can set up our own fully customizable dashboards, filter those by placing the correct widgets. For example, one to show the problems or to show a geographical map. And then making sure to filter exactly what we would like to show on those widgets. So these are fully built in. You can utilize those dashboards to get the exact information that you would like. There's more than 20 widgets built in already. And in Zabbix 6.4, we'll even get a complete Zabbix widget framework, which is in development right now. If they get that all implemented in 6.4, the community can start building their own widgets as well. It will become easier to develop these widgets. So I only expect more and more widgets to show up and these dashboards to become even more useful than they are already. We can see some data right here. We have some graphs available in our Zabbix environment. Of course, we have the dashboard graphs, so we can set up our graphs in the dashboards, quite complex by using datasets and wildcards. Set up your graphs just how you would like to see your data. But you don't always have time to start configuring your dashboards and making sure that you can see that information on all of those various dashboards that you might have configured. So we also have ad hoc graphs, which we can use to get information quite quickly. For example, selecting multiple items like the load averages from the latest data page, and then clicking on display graph, and it will show you the graph just like that. Graphs can also be templated. So if you're setting up your own templates, you can utilize those to set up your graphs already, and then easily set up hundreds or thousands of hosts utilizing the same graphs with their own information based on which host they are configured on. And I'm just going to assume that you guys aren't always just staring at your Zabbix frontend. So we also want to get alerts, probably. Now, Zabbix can also send out alerts to us, so we can define our own actions with conditions, filtering on tags, on host groups, severities, anything that we've set up already, and then define those actions ourselves to make sure that we can escalate the issue, delay the issue, repeat the issue, and send out the alert only when we want it to. We can also customize the severities to better suit our needs. We can make sure that we only show the right problems in the front end, or we can even utilize our Zabbix environment to solve the issue for us. Let's say you have a problem is detected, your Apache server is down, your web server is no longer up and running. And instead of just sending out emails or text messages to our Zabbix users, we can also say, hey, Zabbix, why don't you try to restart that application before we start sending out an email? Letting Zabbix solve the problem for us. And if it's still a problem after Zabbix already tried to fix it, then we can start alerting. Or the other way around, any way we would like, because we can set up our own actions and define it in whichever way we see fit. Now, these alerts can be sent through the various media types that we find in our Zabbix environment. So you can already see a bunch of them here. Basically, we have most of the Atlassian suite like Jira, Opsgenie, Status Page. Of course, we have message providers like Telegram and Signal, as well as PagerDuty, Topdesk, ServiceNow, Redmine, Teams, Slack, RocketChat, and way more. And more are being added as well. So you might find that a new media type is added if there's enough people requesting that media type. So you can always vote for that on support.zabbix.com and see when an official implementation might be done, as well as there's community-made solutions readily available. For example, Signal right there is officially not available, but it's available through the Zabbix community. So we can get that up and running quite easily as well. And of course, there's more to come. So Zabbix is in active closed development by Zabbix, the company Zabbix. And if you want to know what they are doing, I would suggest to go to zabbix.com/roadmap. You can find the entire roadmap there. Some of my favorites right here, for Zabbix 7 LTS, we can expect high availability to be extended towards the Zabbix proxies to provide automatic load balancing, as well as high availability to the proxies right there as well. Some out-of-the-box monitoring and alerting will be added as well. This is basically in every Zabbix release. You might find new templates, new implementations with media types. We'll get distributed monitoring to get a single dashboard from several Zabbix server installations. In 7.2, we can expect some more cloud-native features, a new architecture for horizontal scalability, performance, and high availability for clouds, as well as application performance monitoring. So you might find that they are working on that to make sure that we can get information from various programming languages like Java, Python, PHP, and get that information directly from the application, see what the performance is, do distributed stack traces, as well as use any type of information and start monitoring those applications on the low level. So check out that Zabbix roadmap if you want to see what's coming. Maybe there's a feature for you that you really are looking for before you decide to start running the Zabbix environment, or maybe if you're running it already, to extend your monitoring. All right, any questions about the Zabbix product?
I don't have any specific questions, folks. If you want to ask a question, go to the Q&A. I did get one general question where it says, will there be a recording available? We're working. This is currently being recorded, and we hope to make it available to everyone as quickly as possible. Are there any other questions from anyone? Again, we will have an opportunity at the end for a more general Q&A, but we'll give you another 30 seconds to provide or give us any questions. Nathan, by the way, thank you so much. That was very, very informative. Really appreciate that. Going. Oh, here we go. May I expect the same stability, bug-free, for version 6.2, 6.4 as it is for 6.0 LTS? Nathan? Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah, I was muted. Thank you. So that's a great question, and I actually didn't go over that in my slides. So yeah, may you expect the same stability, bug-free, for version 6.2, 6.4, or 6.0? Well, 6.0 is what we call an LTS release, which means that it gets 5 years of support, which 3 years is full support and 2 years is limited support. And for that whole support period, you can expect bug fixes and major stability issues to be resolved for that whole 5-year period. For your 6.2 and 6.4 or any .2 or .4 release, actually the support period only lasts until the next major release, so the next .2, .4, or .0 release. Which means that if you are running those major versions, those non-LTS versions, you will have to upgrade faster to make sure that there are no bugs in your environment if you're running into a weird issue that you can't explain, for example, as well as any security issues that might arise. So it's recommended in most cases to stick to LTS, unless you really need a feature that's available in a major release, because the major releases are full of new features and they are production ready. Just they have a shorter support cycle. Great question. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. And finally, any other questions? Okay, excellent. Thank you again, Nathan.